I'm Ben Donohue. I'm a VP of engineering at MediaMath. I live in Brooklyn, and yeah, thank you. And I lead a couple of teams. So here's my Twitter handle. Feel free to contact me afterwards. I'll definitely get back to you. I'm really excited to talk about this stuff. And I wanted to ask you guys a question. So how many of you out here, and I can't really see, so maybe shout, are working on a web application that other companies are paying you to use? I see at least one. There's a handful. Cool. So are we. And you're probably here wondering if you can use web components to build your app, right? That's why you're here. That's what this talk is about. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our experience with web components in production. And the enterprise is like a really great place for web components, and I'll explain why later on. So before we get into that, let me give you a brief overview of MediaMath and our platform, TerminalOne. So MediaMath is an advertising technology company. Our clients are agencies, advertisers, media buyers, all trying to set up online ad campaigns to target audiences at scale across the internet, any supply source. So we have this interface that allows you to set up the metadata and review the performance of your campaigns as they're running. And we also have a bunch of underlying technology that does a lot of real-time bidding, where you see online ad auctions happening in 50 milliseconds every time you do a page load. That infrastructure is seeing upwards of 2 million requests per second, which is crazy. The UI, not seeing that many requests per second. Not going to get hit by 1,000 or millions of viral users all of a sudden, right? This is an enterprise application. So most of the folks using our platform are using this UI. Some use the API directly and use it inside of their existing tools. This version of the app has been live since about 2012. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's a bunch of buttons that bring you into different sections. Each one of those is a pretty sizable module. There's probably at least 2 developers working on that on a weekly basis. So all in, there's 20 folks contributing code to this app weekly. So after 2+ years of rapid feature development on TerminalOne, we started to have some problems. This app that I just showed was, it's HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, underpinned by Backbone and Underscore. And great choice at the time, still a good choice, but the framework and the way that we constructed our models and views was not scaling as fast as our desire and need to build more features. So we started to get a lot of redundancy and special snowflake styles and touch this whack-a-mole over here and something pops up over there. So we were having some issues. And I mean, it could be because it was a big code base, it could be because it was a big team. But I don't think this is unique. I think a lot of you guys probably face this in your applications or have seen it at one point. I've certainly seen it in other places. And the other problem with that is, like, the bigger it gets, the harder it is to fix it, right? So you just want to, like, light it on fire and start over. But you can't always do that because you're an enterprise business and you need to make revenue. So 2 years ago at Fluent, a couple of our developers came and got first exposed to web components. And, super nascent, emerging W3C standard. We saw some potential there and started experimenting, I guess is a good way of putting it, prototyping, and looking into how our application would look if we had web components. So if you're not too familiar with capital W, capital C web components, I encourage you to check out webcomponents.org. There was an awesome webcast on the O'Reilly Network earlier this month by Martin Nauman. It's about an hour long, and he'll give you a great overview of what web components are. This talk isn't about that. This talk is about how to use it in your prod app. So ultimately, we saw this technology after some testing that could help us in 3 really big ways. We'd get some stability, we'd get some consistency, and we'd get some velocity. And all of this would not only benefit our teams and our developers, which is often one of the common things you hear about with web components is, yeah, it's great for developers, but what about your users? And well, this would also benefit some of our partner clients, the folks that are building on our APIs. People, we could then give them data components, give them fully baked UI elements to say, you can get access to our technology with these. Build it however you want, but here's the tools to do so. That was really compelling and made it easy to kind of sell upper management about, hey, I need to take some researchers and R&D project over here and work on this. So the other thing here is stability. Developers would get sort of a clear path out of that increasingly fragile code base through encapsulation and reusability. The shadow DOM, custom elements, these are things that are really useful when used correctly. And the way we approached it was by building smaller components first, your labels, your buttons, your input boxes, and testing those thoroughly, and then building your larger elements with those. So we had full confidence along the way of the progress we were making. So we took the little things and we made things like grids, and we're working on our date picker right now. Consistency was also something we were eager to regain, right? So when we started and we were just like 1 or 2 of those modules on the left-hand side, it was easy to be consistent. But when you started blowing out and you've got 20 developers and multiple designers and different teams, different roadmaps, and some different clients in certain cases, it was really difficult to deliver consistently. We were never as consistent as this guy on the trampoline who just nails it every time. I don't know how he does that. So moving to a component-based design allowed us to build this style guide with actual teeth, right? It wasn't like a style guide that you could reference. It was a style guide for building your application that was toothy. So here's a screen grab from that UI design repo. I don't know if that goes that far. And you can see it's our dropdown component. And it's got some cool things, and all of our elements have this same sort of treatment. You get some flat files, so you can see what it looks like really easily, and you can share that around really quickly. But you also get some information, right? So what sort of interactions do these components have? What are some sample uses inside of our app? Really useful stuff. And all of these building blocks, once they're set, allows us to not really worry about hi-fi mockups and pixel-perfect mockups. We can just use wireframes the whole time. We don't ever need to go from wireframe to mockup. Like, we can just go to wireframe, which is obviously faster. But it's not just the wireframes. Like, we can move faster even without wireframes. I think once we've started to speak the common language of, not a drop-down, right? It's the drop-down. We know what that looks like. We don't have to think about, hey, what does it do when you click on it? What happens when you mouse over it? Like, we all just take it for granted. It's the way it is. So another spot, which I'm losing some stuff here, we gained some speed was in our developers' workflow. So this quote is not complete, and I'll try to remember the whole thing. But basically, our framework team, the folks that were building that web components library, built the grid. And a week later, one of the guys that was implementing a feature in TerminalOne, which was like one of those new modules, used the grid for the first time. And he hopped onto HipChat and sent a note to the team and said, hey, I just have to let you guys know that I built this thing in about a day. And this grid, would take any developer on the team at least a week prior. So we're getting some speed in the process and in the development. And I wasn't going to show this GIF either, but because I saw it earlier in the week, but it's just so great. So this is probably a good time for a reality check. This is all fun and all, right? Everybody in this room knows that browser support is an issue when we're talking about web components. And this is why most talks that you'll see or blog posts that you'll read will have questions or comments about, that's cool, I get it, but can you use that in production? Like, what about other users besides your developers? And the sad reality is there isn't a lot of native support for web components. Right now, only Chrome and Opera have full native support for the 4 main components of web components. Pretty sad. Firefox has flat out punted on exploring HTML imports until the ECMAScript 6 import is sorted out, and we don't know when that's going to happen. So what can you do? What did we do? We use Polyfills. You guys are probably familiar with the Polymer project as well. The Polymer team built Platform.js a couple years ago as a shim for using web components on non-native browsers. And they transferred Platform.js to the webcomponents.org group, which has a lot of Polymer members, but some other non-Polymer members as well. And they created the Web Components.js polyfill shim. And now there's pretty great support for all modern browsers. And we've been building with it from the start, and it's totally amazing. It's totally fine. We haven't noticed any issues. And since the application that we've been building is a tool used by thousands of professionals as part of their day-to-day job, we have a really finite set of users, and we can tell who they are. I can take questions after. I want to make sure I get through everything. So we really know, who our users are, and we're in the enviable position of just having, a small set of modern browsers and OS users, right? We don't have to support IE6. So you're going to have to ask yourself, who are your users? That's a big question. We had to ask ourselves. We did a lot of analytics mining before we decided to roll out in production. This is a chart of our numbers from last month, which 75% of Chrome, you're like, wow, that's a lot. And I checked this before we rolled out Web Components 2, and it was 71%. So it's not as though introducing web components has moved people. They were already just kind of using Chrome on our app. And Chrome has had native support for web components since July of last year. So let me take you back to TerminalOne. And so we're talking thousands of users using this every day, 20 developers touching the code base on a daily, weekly basis. And since September of last year, we've had web components in this app, in production, right? So this is really happening. This is web components in prod. You don't have to ask that question every single time. That's one of the beauties of web components, too, is we have total interoperability with our existing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we didn't convert the whole app. We're piecemealing it, right? All of the new stuff is web components, but the old stuff, it's still there, and it still works. So 75% of our user base on Chrome gets the native support, no polyfilling, right? The other 25% are totally fine. We've had no bug reports from anybody about a web component. But as an application that's got users around the world, we're not willing to fully give in to polyfills, right? We want to make sure that if you're in something that we don't know about and we don't know it hasn't been tested, we may show you a little message. And we can do this. I realize not everybody can do this, but this is what's working for us. So right before we launched, we actually saw some really bad performance on pages with a lot of DOM. So our reporting section gives you an option to choose a date range to pull back a bunch of data to see your performance on a daily level. So you could pick a full year's back. And like I said, lots of data, billions of impressions. And our DOM would have to try to render all of that. Hard enough on its own, but then when you've got Platform.js trying to polyfill the entire DOM, you're going to get some script timeouts. And we did. So we did add that user agent check for that reason. We also did a lot of research as to why that script timeout was happening and ended up making a pull request to the Polymer team with some ideas about how to fix it. And that was accepted and really became a moment for me to realize what we were doing with web components was really pushing it forward. Like, we're putting some real production level scenarios through this technology. And things were getting real, right? We also realized we needed to refactor our charting, but that's a separate story. So we made a few more contributions to open source projects. Most recently with, I guess it was Chrome 41, we noticed there was an issue with the host attribute selectors. They were not really being honored consistently on web components. So we logged a ticket with the Chromium team, and 4 days later, they had a fix. And 3 weeks after that, it was part of Chrome 42. So that's pretty awesome. So here's our entire front-end team in November at our office in Chicago, learning about web components, like really diving deep. We had a two-day workshop where people were sharing their experience about how to build them, how to build with them, and really getting comfortable. So we're all in on this. And from the start, we've been treating our web components library as something that we've wanted to open source to move the community forward, and we've been treating it as an internal open source project for the life of it. So it's been over a year. And after months of production use in our main T1 app, I'm happy to share our web components library called Strand. So we just open sourced this on Monday. Huge thanks to my team for getting that done before this talk. And it builds on all the amazing work from the Polymer project and the web components community. And it's a set of core UI web components and data web components and things that you can build your applications with. So let me try to show you a little bit. Cool, you can see some stuff. All right, so this is the documentation. This is hosted on GitHub Pages. I wasn't really sure if I would have a lot of internet connectivity, but I did want to show you this here. It's a web components library, and there's docs, and there's project source. I've got a local version of the docs here running on my machine, just in case the Wi-Fi goes out. And I just wanted to show you a little bit of that. So you come into the Strand docs, and you get some nice information about how to start. And there's, if you want to just not read about installing it, you can always use Bower to install it. Oh, another cool thing that I've got here is this little Chrome extension called Polymer Ready, which isn't going to work, but when it does work, it highlights the web components that are using, oh, there it is. So you can see, if you look on the left-hand nav, you can see those lines pop up. So it highlights the web components that were built with Polymer in any site, right? So I have this installed in my Chrome, and I can kind of, oh, I'm on a site that's using Polymer. Let me see what they're doing. So that's going on. And so why don't we inspect one of these things? That's really easy to see. OK, so now you can see I've got a bunch of list items over here. And they're pretty simple. These are what I would consider a pretty basic web component. And this is the content, and here's our shadow root, which is primarily a bunch of CSS. There's no JavaScript in there. So that's cool. And what else can I show you? Oh, right, responsiveness. All right, yeah, so we've got some articles about how to get started, and I wanted to show some of the components themselves, which are listed all down here. So why don't I show you pull down button. I like this one because it's really simple. All of the documentation for all of these elements is cool because it has a little ACE editor where you can see your actual code as it happens, right? So I can plop that back in, and then you've got your feedback right away, so you know what's going on. So I can change this to add dinosaurs. And that works, and maybe we'll add that to our application, I'm not sure. So here's a pull down, and it's got all that nice interactivity with just those 5 lines of code, which is really cool. And there's that consistency, right? And another thing I like about this thing is it's smart. If you scroll out of the viewport, it pops the select list up, so you can still see those things. You can do things like, what else do I got in here? Got hearts. You can change the icons. I don't know any other ones off the top of my head. I can resize it. So pretty cool, basic stuff. But once we've established our standard, this really works well for us. So I guess I can show you the grid here too, since I do have connectivity. So the grid is that thing that I showed a quote from before, where one of our developers builds this entire data grid in a day, which previously would have taken a week. And you can see why it's so fast, because here's your grid in 5 lines. This JavaScript down here is really just to add data to the grid. So I'll try to keep this all in view for you guys. So I'm scrolling down here. It's pretty nice. I'm going to inspect this too while we're looking at it. Can everybody see in the back? Okay, cool. So another cool thing, hold on, I'm too deep. All right, there's our items. And here's another recycler panel. So you're like, what's a recycler panel? We're using some item recycling in here, which allows this thing to be really performant. Is this scrolling fast? Yeah, it's scrolling pretty fast. So I've only got 50 elements in there, but I could easily throw, here, let's change this too, so it's obvious. Okay, so now we've got different first names. And let's change this to 50,000 records. And it's still whipping through, right? It's really, really cool. I lost my inspector. And so this is recycling through a set of recycle panels, right? So we're not creating 50,000 DOM nodes. We're creating a small set of DOM nodes that we're recycling as things pop off and pop back on. And it moves really quickly. Like if you stay with those numbers somewhat, you can see that it's not problematic at all. So yeah, that's that. And checks work too, and I could check this one off, and everything else is really nice. So that's a little taste of Strand. Definitely check it out. I wanted to also include, just for people who don't know and haven't looked at the other libraries out there, obviously there's an awesome one from the Polymer team, Polymer core elements and paper elements, which you've probably heard about. I came across this last week, which I think is really cool. This Sidley Agency in Paris built an internal dashboard about their office. So they've got a bunch of Arduino connectors in their office, and they're all connected to custom web components that have made this dashboard, which is really neat. So you can see in here, pretty sweet. This is all web components. Where's my favorite one? Oh, they got rid of it. They used to have a button that was, oh, here it is. They just moved it. So this button, 619 switches on this button. Yes! Yeah, I scored. So it's funny though, like the first time I found this site, they were only getting like 37 a day, and now it's 620, right? And now you guys have found it too. And so, and it's funny because this is also in France, and they're all asleep at this point, and they don't even know we're doing this. All right, let me pop back here. So yeah, that's a little bit of Strand and a little bit about web components and some proof that you can actually use that stuff in prod. And we're using it, and we love it, and we'd love to hear more from other folks that are doing it. Here's some resources. I'll include this when I post my slides later. And thank you, guys. If anybody has questions, feel free to, oh, sure.
You mentioned that you're basically working only with desktop, but there has to be someone who's stubborn enough to try it on an iPad or a tablet. What kind of experience they get? Do they just get the flat out, get a real browser type thing? Yeah, we have not made our application responsive for other viewports yet. It's one of those things where it's like a desktop application. What my vision would be to change the whole experience. But the web components themselves, the actual web components, those things, they work on mobile. They work in other browsers. Okay, thank you.
Did anybody not hear the question? Well, I guess I answered it in a way that you probably understand. Does anybody else have questions? If you do, come on up and we can chat afterwards. Thanks.